Okay. We'll call the Committee on Energy and Commerce together. Today, we're here to consider three thoughtful pieces of legislation originating from three of our distinguished subcommittees. Collectively, each of these bills exemplify the hardworking and bipartisan nature of this committee, and I'm hopeful that we can advance these solutions today in regular order. Two of the three bills under consideration are sponsored by our Communications and Technology Subcommittee Chairman, Marsha Blackburn, one of which is a bill to reauthorize Federal Communications Commission. For a quarter of a century, the FCC has gone without being reauthorized. So today we take a significant step to changing that. This bill will accomplish several important tasks and also comes with a very special name. It's named the Repack Airwaves Yielding Better Access for Users of Modern Services Act, or more specifically, Ray Baum's Act, in a nod to our dear friend, mine of nearly 30 years, and the former staff director of this committee, who recently passed away peacefully after many years of long battle with cancer. He left us on Friday and Thursday, and I guess not everybody knew that, but yeah, it's a tough deal. He was a good man, good family man, great grandpa, I think a mentor for many, and I said something the other night, and I thank those who participated last night one way or another, but I think some people thought he was just another member on the floor from time to time. They just didn't know what his name was. The only thing he lacked was a voting card, and there were times I'd see him go right up to the leader or the speaker and kind of argue Energy and Commerce's way, and I thought, how do you do that? But he did, and he had a special way about him, and he loved public service, and so we creatively found a way to name this FCC reauthorization and repack after our dear friend Ray. The memorial service is Saturday in La Grande, and I know that if anybody has notes or something they'd like me to take out and convey to Christine and the family, happy to do that, and I know they'd be honored to read your thoughts. Yeah, I'd yield to. We'll just kind of go off course here, Anna.
Thank you. I think, too, Mr. Chairman, that it would be wonderful if the entire committee placed something in the congressional record.
Oh, that's
the
nice.
name with all of our names on it to Christine, because she knew firsthand how much he loved his public service.
Yes.
And she went along with that.
Yes, she did.
She went along with that. When I came into the room, I was immediately sad.
Yeah.
I was immediately sad. And he was, Ray was a good person.
Yeah.
To his core. He was decent, he had integrity, he had that kind of legislative common sense that when people were hot under the collar, and go to him, myself included.
Me too.
He would smile, and he didn't use the words, take a deep breath, everything's going to be all right, or I think you're off track and everything's still going to be all right. But he made it all right. And I want to commend you, Mr. Chairman, because you've really been a brother to him. I don't know if the committee knows the long history that our chairman and Ray had. Obviously from Oregon, they both ran and became members of the Oregon State Legislature. Ray went on to the PUC, then became its chairman there.
Under a Democrat governor, I might add.
Yes, under
Democratic governors, two of them.
Democratic, it's called.
Democratic governors.
I know it's hard to say.
Oh, now, Anna, it's going to be okay. Come
All
on.
right, okay.
Is that with a small d or a big D?
Big. Anyway, and Ray came to Washington to serve here as the senior policy person in the committee at Greg's invitation. And it was a big thing for him. He was really, we had long conversations about how conflicted he was because his family was not here. He was looking for a place. He wasn't sure whether he should be on the Hill. He didn't know whether his wife wanted to be someplace else. So, you know, it was a reminder that, you know, when we do these jobs and people are standing or sitting behind us, they have lives too, and they have considerations, and they made sacrifices. But boy, was he happy here. Yeah. He was happy here. He took a brief journey someplace else. I know he wasn't going to be so thrilled with that one.
You told me.
I told him. I told him before he left, and he came back. I saw him standing there. I said, "What did I tell you?" And but he, you know what? He served all of us, with a great deal of respect.
Yep.
Genuine respect for what the printed word is in these bills, and how they were going to walk into people's lives and what it was going to do for the country. So he was a patriot. He was a great husband. He was a fabulous father of 6, the grandfather of 10. He served his state. He served his country, and he was our good friend. And it's a life lived very well, but far too short. We're going to miss him. We'll always miss him. So let's, we'll draw something up, and we'll put everybody's name on it from the committee. If there's anyone that objects, let me know. I doubt it. Hold your hand up now. Those that aren't here, you're out of luck because your name's going to be on it, or you're in luck because your name is going to be on it. So thank you, Greg, and thank you for bringing your friend into our lives. If it weren't for you, we would have never known him.
Well, you know, when Fred asked me to be chair of the telecom sub, I called Ray, and he was chairman of the Public Utility Committee. I said, "Ray, I'm going to need your help on some of these telecom." "Oh yeah, call anytime." Yeah. I said, no, Ray, I'm going to need your help." "Oh, well, I could come back from time to..." I said, "No, Ray, I'm going to need your help here full time."
It was a big deal for him.
Oh, no, I don't think Christine would ever go along with that.
It was hard.
But their youngest was leaving the nest, and she said, "Actually, I think that's a good idea." And then he was really conflicted.
Yeah.
So they moved back, and she said it was 7 of the best years of their lives, because it was the two of them and reconnecting after the kids are out of the nest, and how much he loved public service. And for those that don't know, he battled bone cancer, stage 4, for the 3 or 4 years.
And he suffered enormously, and he never complained once.
And this kept him vibrant and engaged. Yeah.
I never heard him complain, so I think he's living in the sight of Almighty God, and I will never forget him. I don't think anyone here ever will either.
Yeah, thank you. Well, to quote Ray Baum, the fun never stops. Some of you probably heard him say that about 1,000 times, so fun never stops. Yeah, during the 27-hour markup, yeah. Yeah, he went. We made him go home because he was dealing with all this stuff, and he was still texting. And so, but not driving. No. Yeah, watching. All right. Well, thank you for that. I'll go back to a regular order here, and thanks for the indulgence. I would note for our colleagues a couple of things that were in the original FCC reauthorization, both rural call completion and Kerry's law, we no longer have to include because they've been signed into law. We had 19 of our bills as part of the CAPS agreement make it down to the president's desk. So all the work that we've done as a committee leading up to that agreement allowed us to move forward and get our work done. While the last but certainly not least, this will include the repack language that you've heard both myself and Mr. Pallone champion. It's very important by making sure we properly relocate broadcasters displaced in the incentive auction. We add further legitimacy to future spectrum auctions and other improvements in communications policy. Years ago, when I became chairman of the telecom subcommittee, as I mentioned, Ray came back and worked on all of this, and we just really want to see this out. So it's appropriate that we name it after him. Also authored by Mrs. Blackburn, we'll consider H.R. 1876, the Good Samaritan Health Professionals Act. This bill will help improve the emergency response of trained health professionals by providing some limited liability protections for health practitioners, providing care to those in a federally declared disaster area. We recently as you know, as a country, faced extremely destructive and deadly hurricanes, storms, devastating wildfires, California, Oregon, and elsewhere in the West. Natural disasters, other large-scale emergency requires an all-hands-on-deck effort when rescue crews are overloaded treating victims. And so the willingness of qualified volunteers to offer up their expertise to those in need should not be deterred by the fear of liability actions against them. So by filling in some gaps in our current liability protections, we can help secure and speed up the process of getting qualified medical personnel on the ground in time to save lives. And I'd like to thank Chairman Blackburn for her excellent work and in a bipartisan manner to get this bill to where it is today. Now, while ceiling fan regulations may not be on the front burner issue for Congress, getting them right is important for the companies that make them and the consumers that use them. As we learned at our November 7th hearing, Department of Energy decided to tighten the energy efficiency standards for ceiling fan light kit standards in 2019, but did not make changes to the underlying ceiling fans for one more year in 2020. The result was the two deadlines make compliance difficult and more so than is necessary for some manufacturers and retailers. So Mr. Hudson's H.R. 3477 would harmonize the two deadlines by setting both as January 21, 2020. This will facilitate compliance and lead to lower prices on some models of ceiling fans. Today, we have a great opportunity to make meaningful reforms to our public health efforts and for the healthcare professionals serving our communities to provide certainty for our manufacturers and to increase transparency and accountability to the Federal Communications Commission. So with that, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in supporting these three good and bipartisan pieces of legislation. With that, I would recognize my friend and colleague from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for any opening comments he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to basically agree with all of you, and with regard to Ray, it was so upsetting to me when I found out, what was happening to him in the last few weeks. But I guess when I heard what Congresswoman Blackburn said about the 27-hour markup. That was kind of the test of, testing us all in terms of our ability to cooperate and be nice to each other. And throughout all that, Ray was just the best, in terms of wanting to be here and still texting when he left, and trying to make it as pleasant as possible because of his optimistic attitude. So that kind of really showed the true test of the man that evening, or that 27 hours, if you will. I don't want to repeat what you've said about the bills. The bills obviously before us are bipartisan. I appreciate the fact that the majority was willing to work with us in putting these together. Let me say briefly a little bit about each of the bills. With regard to the ceiling fan bill, the legislation's purpose is to align the current 2019 compliance deadline with a separate standard for ceiling fans set for 2020. And new standards for these kits will save money and reduce carbon emissions, so I would have liked to see them in place sooner. However, the legislation will make it easier for some retailers to comply, and it enjoys broad bipartisan support. H.R. 1876, the Good Samaritan Act, would limit the civil liability of volunteer health professionals that provide their services during disaster. I'm always concerned about preempting state laws, and I do not think Congress should do this lightly. However, I think we can all agree that we need to support our healthcare professionals who are volunteering their services during national disasters, which are occurring with greater and greater frequency. So again, I want to thank the chairman for working with us on a bipartisan basis to improve the bill and address the scope issues that we had raised at the subcommittee markup. And finally, the third bill would reauthorize the FCC. This legislation is better as a result of our working together. The manager's amendment includes text that will finally protect television viewers and radio listeners during the incentive auction repack. We've been working hard to solve this problem since last Congress, and I'm pleased this committee is finally acting. We have to ensure that all Americans have access to their local broadcast stations during the repack. Access to local info has become even more important in the wake of last year's deadly natural disasters. In this amendment, not only do we help ensure consumers' broadcast stations don't go dark, we also include $50 million in funding to help educate consumers about the transition. And all of our efforts will go to waste if people do not know how to get their TVs to work. During the subcommittee markup, I made clear that protecting viewers was a prerequisite for me to move forward with reauthorizing the FCC at full committee, and I appreciate, again, the bipartisan work that got us here today. So I appreciate all our work together, and we're, on the minority side, very supportive of moving forward on these bills. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Are there other members seeking recognition? Chair recognizes Chairman of the Telecommunications Subcommittee, Ms. Blackburn, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Good Samaritan Healthcare Professionals Act is something that really is a culmination of many years of hard work in a bipartisan manner to address the shortages of medical volunteers available to provide care to victims of natural disasters and those affected during emergencies. And as previously stated, the bill is going to put in place narrowly tailored federal civil liability protections for licensed healthcare professionals who volunteer their services in a time of need and ensure that these professionals can deliver timely, critical care to disaster victims. And then we get to the FCC Reauthorization Act. We found bipartisan consensus on many member priorities and advanced this bill unanimously with the understanding that more work needed to be done before consideration by the full committee. We have done that over the last couple of months, and we are pleased to bring the Ray Bombs Act forward today. I know that we've got a couple of outstanding issues that we're working on with Mr. Tonko and Mr. Lujan and others to resolve as we get ready to move this to the floor. So I thank all the members of the committee for their work and their determination to get this done, and I yield back my time.
Generally yields back. Are there other members seeking recognition? Democrat side, seeing none. Any on the Republican side? Mr. Latta is recognized for 1 minute. And
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, first of all, I want to thank you very much for hosting the special order last night for Ray and allowing me to participate. I also know that how hard that work he did and the staff did, especially when we got the My Self-Drive Act out of Committee 54 to nothing and out of the House with a voice vote, which most people couldn't believe that could get done, but Ray could do it. So I thank you for it. Mr. Chairman, while I support the bills before the committee today, I would be remiss not to express my disappointment that H.R. 3787, the Small Entity Regulatory Relief Opportunity Act, was not included in the underlying FCC Reauthorization Act. The bill introduced by myself and Mr. Schrader would streamline procedures at the FCC for small businesses to seek waivers of relief from new regulations. I applaud the majority's commitment to produce bipartisan legislation. I'm pleased that the FCC Reauthorization Act is a product of compromise. However, when attempting to include zero into the base text, even offering changes to the language, we received pushback from the minority, despite having their own member as a sponsor of the bill, and several of the Democrat officers reaching out to minority staff asking for Ciro's inclusion. I appreciate the bipartisan support for Ciro, and I hope to continue working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to move it through committee and to the House floor. Thank you, Mr.
Thank the
Chairman. I yield
gentleman.
back.
Are there other members seeking recognition? Mr. Schrader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take very long. I follow up on what my good friend Congressman Latta said with regard to H.R. 3787, the Small Entity Regulatory Relief Act. Wanting to get that to be part of this reauthorization. It's a bipartisan bill. We've worked hard on this, trying to give regulatory relief to small entities that are subject to FCC's jurisdiction. Indeed, included in today's FCC package are 12 bills from members of the committee. Frankly, we feel our legislation was equally worthy of consideration. I come from a very rural district that has a number of small providers, and it's just simply unreasonable to expect that many of these folks would be subjected to the same regulatory burdens that all the big folks have to deal with. To be clear, we're not asking for anything crazy. We're just trying to get meaningful framework for some of these smaller providers. Basically, the bill does three things, as was alluded to. Directs the FCC to establish streamlined cost-saving procedures for small entities. We defer the imposition of new regs on small entities for a year unless we specifically prohibit such a deferral, so we still maintain control. And we require the FCC to review existing regulations every 3 years to determine if there's a reason to modify any obligations currently imposed by the FCC on these smaller entities. We want to have good competition. I think sometimes we have an app for making things a little more difficult than they should be. Really shouldn't be very controversial in our opinion. It's not a heavy lift, and sincere hope that we can move this bill later on this year.
We'll continue the discussion, yeah. I think we go now, just for member awareness, your statements, of course, would be put in the record pursuant to our rules. We are expecting votes on the floor about 4:20. So the question will come, do we finish today? Do we come back after votes? Do we, so let that guide you in your opening statements, not
Thank
trying
you,
to
Mr.
take away
Chairman.
from anybody, but Mr. Flores is recognized for a whole minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate being the last person to get to comment on this in opening comments. I appreciate you holding this markup, and I want to thank Chairman Blackburn for offering her bill to reauthorize the FCC, which is long overdue. There are many positive policy improvements in the bill, but I'm particularly pleased to see that we're providing assistance to our nation's broadcasters as they prepare to adjust their operations as a result of the repack. In particular, I appreciate the inclusion of Section 603, which makes funds available for radio broadcasters. This section echoes the fundamentals of the bill that Rep. Gene Green and I introduced, which is H.R. 3685, the Radio Consumer Protection Act, which establishes a radio protection fund for the narrow purpose of reimbursing impacted stations for their costs associated with their response to the repack. The 2012 incentive auction has been and continues to be a tremendous catalyst for broadband deployment, but certainly had an unintended consequence for our radio broadcasters. Both H.R. 3685 and now Section 603 will prevent radio broadcasters from being damaged by the repack. I thank the chairman for the support of this proposed solution to address this issue. That said, one last comment. My bill originally included AM, FM, and non-commercial educational FM and FM translator radio broadcast stations under the in the bill. 603 only pertains to FM stations, so we'll need to work on that before we go to the floor. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Other members seeking recognition, Mr. Loebsack. Oh, wait a minute, Mr. Green, I guess, is next up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my colleague on our repack fund got my attention. I want to thank you for your work on, Chairman, on H.R. 1876 and the Good Samaritan Health Professionals Act 2018. I think we all agree that we need to support our healthcare professionals who are volunteering their services during national disasters, which are occurring with greater and greater frequency. Their brave and selfless contributions represent the best of what this country has to offer. I want to thank Congresswoman Blackburn for addressing my concern about the scope of liability coverage and amending the bill to address my concern about not extending liability to cover ongoing treatment or routine medical care in another state. I look forward to working together on a bipartisan basis to move this bill out of the committee and the full House. I also want to thank the ranking member and chair for coming together and adding funds for the Broadcaster Repack Fund in the FCC reauthorization bill we're considering today, and my colleague from Texas, Congressman Flores. This new fund will ensure that local television and radio stations that have substantial relocation costs due to the FCC spectrum auction will be made whole. It's estimated that a financial impact of repack for local radio could be as much as $50 million and nearly $1 billion for local stations nationwide. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Other members seeking recognition, Mr. Hudson, I think, is probably next up for a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and considering the time crunch, I'm going to forego my fantastic statement and just ask unanimous consent that I be able to submit for the record a letter from the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association supporting
Without
HR
objection.
3477.
Mr. Loebsack, recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to thank the chairs and ranking members for this markup today. We've got 3 good bills, and in particular, I'm pleased to see the FCC reauthorization going forward. This actually represents what I think we need to be doing a lot more of in Washington, and what people outside the Beltway want to see happen more often. That's members of Congress coming together in a bipartisan manner to adopt a common sense bill in this case. A lot of good things in this bill. I'm particularly pleased that the committee has agreed to include my legislation, which I've talked about ad nauseum, I would agree, and that is the Rural Wireless Access Act in the greater package. I want to thank Mr. Costello for working with me on this bipartisan bill that will help provide the data needed to improve wireless voice and mobile internet services and ensure the resources go to the areas that need it most. And being from a rural area, I'm very concerned about this issue. So I want to thank you for having this markup today. I want to thank Ms. Blackburn in particular for working with me on a bipartisan basis to make sure that this bill is included in the larger reauthorization. Thank you, and I yield back.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for your good work. Gentleman yields back. Other members on the majority side seeking recognition? Seeing none. Chair recognizes gentleman from California for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I want to thank you, Chairman Walden, as well as Chairman Blackburn, for following through on your commitment to work with me to include language in this bill that would help close the digital divide in Indian country. My bill, the Tribal Broadband Development Act, would direct the FCC to identify what areas in Indian country currently lack access to broadband internet and within 30 months conclude a rulemaking to address these areas. This means the FCC will have to take real, concrete action and provide resources to eliminate the digital divide in these unserved tribal lands across the nation. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Other members seeking, gentleman from California is recognized. Mr. Teeters.
Mr. Chairman, I merely ask unanimous consent to enter into the record for H.R. 3477, a February 14th letter from the California Retailers.
Without objection.
Thank you. You bet.
All right. All right. No other members seeking. We'll move on then to chair now calls up H.R. 3470. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Butterfield, recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman Walden. I just want to very briefly enter into the record that I want to thank my friend Congressman Hudson for working together with us on this bill on H.R. 3477, the Ceiling Fan Energy Conservation Harmonization Act. I want to thank him for his friendship and his bipartisan way in which we handle this, and just urge my colleagues to enact it. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Okay, anyone else seeking recognition? If not. Chair now calls up H.R. 3477, asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 3477, to deem the compliance date for amended energy conservation standards for ceiling fan light kits to be January 21, 2020.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open for amendment at any time. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? If not, the question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 3477 to the House. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. The chair now calls up H.R. 1876, is favorably forwarded by the Subcommittee on Health and on January 17, 2018, and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 1876, to amend the Public Health Service Act to limit the liability of healthcare professionals who volunteer to provide healthcare services in response to a disaster.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open for amendment at any point. The chair recognizes Mrs. Blackburn for the purpose of an amendment, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 1876, offered by Mrs. Blackburn.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and Ms. Blackburn is recognized for up to 5 minutes in support of her amendment.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the markup that we had on this bill at the subcommittee last month, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, noted his concern that the bill did not limit the scope of the bill's protections to cover only care rendered in the state or states where the disaster occurred. So the amendment would correct that. This was a wise observation. I appreciate that he brought it to our attention. The amendment puts in place a line that will cover that, and I would encourage support for the amendment and the bill, and I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, the question now comes on adoption of the amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Are there any other amendments? Seeing none, the chair goes to the right crib sheet here. The question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 1876 as amended to the House. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the measure is favorably reported as amended. Chair now calls up H.R. 4986 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 4986, to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to reauthorize appropriations for the Federal Communications Commission to provide for certain procedural changes to the rules of the Commission to maximize opportunities for public participation and efficient decision-making and for other purposes.
Without objection, first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. Chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the Telecom Subcommittee, Ms. Blackburn, for purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4986, offered by Mrs. Blackburn.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and Ms. Blackburn is recognized for up to 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I will simply take this time to say a thank you to the staff who has worked so hard on both sides of the aisle to get this legislation ready to go, to craft the amendment that addresses the concerns. As I said earlier, we still have a couple of outstanding issues that we are working on, but we know that what we've done is to address the repack issue. We have addressed the reauthorization issue. I thank the staff and the team that has worked and the members who have brought forward ideas, and how wonderful that after 25 years we will reauthorize the FCC. And I yield back.
Generally yields back, and I would just steal a little bit of her time to thank her and her team and the team on the minority side for your great work on this act and the naming of it, the Ray Baums Act. And he also chaired the joint committee between the Public Utility Commissions and the FCC. So it's even he did a lot of work there. I now recognize Chairman from or the ranking member. Let's not get carried away here. Yeah, I know where that one's going. The ranking member from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy, as I said, that this amendment is named in honor of the passing of our friend Ray Baum. It's fitting that we name this particular bill after Ray. He had a passion for telecommunications policy and a special place in his heart for broadcasting. And as I said last night on the floor, he was also the eternal optimist. I know that no one thought that we'd be ever able to come together to protect broadcast viewers, but Ray never faltered in his belief that we could find a solution that we could all get behind, and he was right. He would be proud of everything else we're accomplishing here today. We were able to incorporate proposals from members on both sides of the aisle, just the way Ray would have liked it. And let me just mention a little of what Ray helped the Democratic members get done today. We included language from Congressman McNerney that will help us understand how to help veterans connect to broadband. We were able to add provisions from Congresswoman Eshoo to help first responders find someone when they call 911. We included Congressman Loebsack's Rural Wireless Access Act to ensure the FCC is using the best coverage data. Mr. Engel authored a section that makes sure our government is working better together and has more relevant cyber threat information. And Congressman Ruiz contributed a section to ensure the FCC is properly supporting broadband on tribal lands. And finally, we're voting on my Viewer Protection Act. The American people depend on broadcasters to provide local news and information. My district saw firsthand how important that is when we were struck by Hurricane Sandy 5 years ago. And the Viewer Protection Act will make sure no one loses that signal as a result of the FCC's repacking efforts. Now, I just want to say that the chairman and I have agreed we will provide funding for this, money, I should say, for this fund, and that includes money for high-power broadcasters, for low-power broadcasters, dollars for radio broadcasters, and for consumer education, because without these resources, the bill is not meaningful. So I just want to make it clear for the record, Mr. Chairman, and ask for your commitment to ask for appropriations to which we had agreed.
Well, before I do that, I didn't know Ray had given away the store. No. So thank you for your comments, and absolutely, that's the whole reason we're doing this is not only to provide the expanded authorities we've now come to learn after all these years of the auction out there. There were some areas we missed, frankly, when we wrote the first bill. This captures that so that people won't be punished for the repack that shouldn't be, and that we get the funding. So this opens the door for that, and you have my full commitment that we'll do this arm in arm and go to the leadership and the appropriators, and I secured some level of commitment all the way up and down the appropriator food chain. But it's important that we pass this piece of legislation, both to reauthorize the FCC and to make these other changes and to adjust the underlying statute so that we can take care of the people we said we'd take care of. So,
All right. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
The other member seeking recognition, go to the Republican side. Mr. Johnson from Ohio is recognized for up to 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am pleased that legislation that I sponsored to create an independent inspector general for the FCC, which was H.R. 2636, was included in both the FCC reauthorization bill text and Chairman Blackburn's substitute amendment. Currently, the IG for the FCC is not only appointed by the chairman, but also reports to and is under general supervision of the chairman of the commission. Straightforward legislation that amends the Inspector General Act of 1978 to require the president, with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint the Inspector General of the Federal Communications Commission is needed. Over 30 other federal department and agencies have an independent office of Inspector General. DOD does, Labor does, HHS, GSA, et cetera. Good governance is a matter of transparency and accountability. And to do that, the FCC needs to have an independent IG. So I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting Chairman Blackburn's amendment in the nature of a substitute that not only reauthorizes, but also provides critical improvements to the FCC.
And the gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you for holding this important markup today and for working with the Democrats to include a number of important priorities that are in the bill. We're all very grateful for that. I'm particularly proud to see legislation that I authored in the last Congress, the Response Act, included in the manager's amendment to H.R. 4986. The legislation requires the FCC, and I think members have heard me speak of this over and over and over again, to conclude a proceeding requiring all multi-line telephone systems to provide first responders with precise location technology when 911 is dialed. This will ensure that anyone that's dialing 911 from a multi-line telephone system, whether they're in a 12-story hotel or a 30-story office building, the first responders will have the specific location of where the emergency is. And I should add, our office buildings. I mean, it's a labyrinth of hallways and pathways. So I think this is really important. As we approach the 50th anniversary of the first 911 call that was dialed in our country, I think that it's a must for Congress and the FCC to do everything possible to improve the accuracy of 911 calls so that first responders really have everything that they need. I'm also pleased to see legislation that I've introduced over the last 4 Congresses to promote more bipartisan collaboration. I knew it would happen one day, I mean, tenacity around here, right? Bipartisan cooperation and collaboration amongst FCC commissioners, that's also included in today's bill. In the last Congress, I introduced it with Mr. Shimkus and Mr. Doyle, and it allows for a bipartisan majority of commissioners to meet for collaborative discussions as long as they disclose such meetings. I've always thought that made sense. All Republican and Democratic FCC commissioners agreed and supported the legislation, so it's finally that day. So today's markup, I think, demonstrates that there actually is bipartisan collaboration here, and I think that we should extend ourselves with every opportunity possible to promote it. I'm very grateful to you, Chairman Walden, and to Chairwoman Blackburn for working with me on these important endeavors, and I look forward to seeing the first reauthorization of the FCC since 1991. It's incredible. Move one step closer to becoming law, and I think that this is legislation that is worthy of every member's vote. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for good work and kind comments. Are there members on the Republican side seeking recognition? Mr. Lance is recognized for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I move to strike the last word. I would like to commend you and the rest of the committee leadership and staff on both sides of the aisle for your tremendous work on making this important reauthorization possible. After 25 years, we are finally moving toward passage of the reauthorization of the Federal Communications Commission. As an authorizing committee, this is one of our most important duties, and I commend you, Mr. Chairman, for your commitment to reauthorizing agencies under our jurisdiction. I'm pleased that this legislation contains the Anti-Spoofing Act, a bill I have worked on with Congresswoman Meng of Queens County in New York City and Chairman Emeritus Barton of Texas, and we have been working on this issue for several years. Spoofing is an insidious practice used by scammers to call consumers using a fake telephone number, often pretending to be a bank or a governmental agency. This legislation would provide a much-needed legislative fix to prohibit spoofing over text messaging and IP voice services. I thank you and also Chair Blackburn for including these provisions to protect consumers. And unfortunately, often spoofing occurs with senior citizens or with veterans, and it is a horrific practice. I'm also glad that we were able to include language to address the funding shortfall for broadcasters regarding the spectrum repack that resulted from recent incentive auction. And finally, of course, I join everyone else on this committee in our recognition of Ray Baum, a fitting tribute that this bill is named in his honor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge a yes vote on this important legislation and yield back the balance of
Thank the gentleman for his work and kind comments. Go to the ranking member of the Telecom Subcommittee, Mr. Doyle, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and along with all the other members, I want to pay my respects to Ray Baum. I know his passing was a great personal loss to you and his family. He was a dedicated public service, and he was a kind and generous person, and we all miss him. Mr. Chairman, the FCC reauthorization bill before us today is a good bill, and it's a product of bipartisan compromise. It includes a number of bipartisan and Democratic priorities that we're happy to see included. I won't repeat them. Mr. Pallone has already done that. I'm happy to see the committee is finally moving forward with authorizing additional funds for the Incentive Auction Repack Fund. This money will go to ensure that broadcasters are held harmless through this process, and also ensures that additional funds will be made available for the repack cost of LPTV and FM radio stations. And while I'm happy to see that we were also able to include funds for consumer education and outreach and to ease the impact of the repack on consumers, I still think that more needs to be done, and I would prefer that we made more funds available. I intend to support the amendment to this bill, and I hope to see this bill advance to the floor. All that being said, there still are some serious issues that are facing this committee and the American people. Many of these are self-inflicted wounds, such as actions taken by the FCC to repeal net neutrality and gutting competition in the business data service market. And then there's the FCC's planned actions on Lifeline that could leave millions of people without access to 911, medical services, or loved ones. Other problems are ones of Congress and the administration's own design on broadband privacy and rural broadband, and a seeming refusal to dedicate funds to build out, despite all evidence that the testimony before our own committee and the urging of our rural members. It's my sincere hope that we not lose sight of the importance of these issues also and the impact that they're having and will have on our country. But this is, the bill before us is a good compromise, and I do intend to support it, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back balance of his time. Are there other members seeking recognition on the majority side? If not, are there members on the Democratic side? Got to remember seniority. I guess we go here, don't we? To Ms. Matsui is recognized for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also offer my condolences to Ray Baum's family. Ray was also someone around here who was steady as a rock and a man of good humor. And I believe that he would be proud of the way we are proceeding today. I am pleased we're coming together to reauthorize the Federal Communications Commission and ensure that our local broadcasters have the resources they need after the incentive auction. Telehealth services, precision agriculture, public safety communications, and connected devices all rely on access to spectrum, the invisible infrastructure of the 21st century. Additional spectrum is necessary both to expand wireless coverage across rural America and build capacity across all of America. That is why I'm pleased the Spectrum Auction Deposits Act, which Congressman Guthrie and I introduced, was included in this package. Importantly, this will allow the FCC to continue to conduct auctions so we can unlock the spectrum necessary to deploy next-generation broadband networks. Without this fix, spectrum auctions that will lead to the expansion of broadband access across the country may be held off indefinitely. I thank the committee and Congressman Guthrie for their attention to this bipartisan issue and look forward to working together to enact this provision into law. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Other members seeking recognition. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I support this bill. It does have good provisions recommended by both sides. But there's a concern I have, and it's one that I've expressed before. Rural America is on the precipice of being left behind or being fully integrated into the modern economy that requires full broadband service. And the FCC and this committee has the responsibility to take on the very substantial challenges that face rural America, or it will be left behind. This was an opportunity for us to make some statements, even if we have policy disagreements. But net neutrality, in my view, is crucial. Net neutrality was an existing policy that was working. It has been taken away by the current FCC without really any hearings on this committee. We had bright line rules that banned paid prioritization, it banned blocking, and it banned throttling. I'm very concerned about the Wild West world we're in right now, where we don't know what the future will be. A second concern I have is about the Sinclair Tribune merger. We haven't had a hearing or talked about this merger. 215 broadcast stations would be controlled by a new company, reaching 72% of U.S. households. It was President Ronald Reagan who understood the importance of having local television service. Shouldn't we be having hearings to ask the question whether we should eliminate the main studio rule? In rural Vermont, we want local broadcast stations to have physical studios in the area of the license to ensure local news. And that's true across rural America. Should we be relaxing media ownership rules, eliminating the rule that one entity could not own two major broadcast stations in the same local market? Rural America wants local news. And then the third question is rural broadband. We all want it. We've got strong support for it from Republicans and Democrats. And we've heard some testimony about the necessity of regulatory adjustments and perhaps easing some regulations to allow for the build-out. I'm all for that. But there is absolutely no question, and we shouldn't pretend that there is, that there's no market incentive to be building out in rural America. It just doesn't support it. Will this committee take the lead in saying we have to have a public policy, much like this Congress did when it came to rural electrification, where it wasn't for profit reasons that there was a build-out of that infrastructure. It was because we respected and understood the importance of rural America and the contribution it can make to all of us. That's our job. So this is a good bill, but this is the challenge, and it's a challenge about rural America and whether all of us are going to work together to make sure they are not left behind. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, that'll be a commitment we take on, and I will yield.
You got it. And in fact, I was privileged to be in the White House for about an hour and a half in a bipartisan meeting on infrastructure earlier today with the president and made that very case. And I know you represent a very rural state. Your state would fit in one of my 20 counties. So I got this one in terms of the importance of making sure that we connect all of America at speeds and capabilities that bring us all together as a country. And this is something that is a focus of mine, has been a focus of mine, and I know it's shared with many on the committee on both sides and the work we all do. So we've got to find the path forward here. I was encouraged there is some money, at least allegedly put aside in the proposal. The President's willing to work with us to build upon that. And we're all in. And part of what we're doing here on the REPAC, by the way, helps speed up the effort to get wireless coverage out into areas underserved. So this is a big cause of yours and mine and many on this committee to achieve. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
and I would just, for situational awareness, they have called the votes, 13 minutes left. So are there other members seeking recognition on either side of the aisle? The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Strike the last word. Mr. Chairman, first off, I want to say thank you to you for bringing members together last night to recognize Mr. Ray Baum. I apologize sincerely to you, to our colleagues, and his family that I wasn't able to attend in person. But being deeply saddened by the passing of Ray, who was a consummate professional, whose decency and graciousness showed in everything that he did. As we know, Ray brought decades of expertise and a depth of knowledge to everything that he did and everything that he touched. The staff that had a chance to get to know him and work with him, not just on this committee, but in his time and tenure with the broadcasters, and before that with his leadership in the Oregon State Legislature as well as the PUC. That's where my timeline and my appreciation for Ray goes back to at the time that we both served on our respective commissions, our utility commissions together. Ray was brilliant then, was brilliant here. First time I saw Ray when I was first appointed as a member of this committee, I said, "Ray, what are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to work with you." And I said, "Wonderful. Who are you working with?" And he said, "Mr. Walden." And my frown went from that to a little bit of confusion. And I says, "Ray, we certainly worked on a lot of incredible things when we were together. Maybe we'll do it here." And he said, "Well, I'm always willing to. You make sure you get the support of Mr. Walden and we can get anything done." It's how Ray always brought a smile to the toughest of negotiations and situations. And I know I'm going to miss him deeply. When I had a tough question, as you know, Mr. Chairman, Ray's the guy that I went to, and he's going to be deeply missed. So thank you for acknowledging him by naming this bill after him. Mr. Chairman, I also want to associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Welch, coming from a district that is 47,000 square miles, one of the larger ones in the country. The importance of providing coverage in rural America, so I appreciate your commitment there. I also want to share my appreciation to the chair, to Ms. Blackburn, and my Republican colleagues to work together on the FCC Tribal Operating Expense Order. Mr. Chairman, not to get into all the details associated with this, but this is an order that we all know has been delayed and has been waiting for action since February 13th of 2017. It's one that there's a lot of bipartisan support within this committee. Many of us who represent tribal nations, sovereign nations from around the country. And Mr. Chairman, I'm just certainly hoping that the conversations and the communications to try to get this resolved, when we know that there's no good reason why this isn't being acted on by the FCC, that we can certainly get some agreement today. So again, just wanted to show my appreciation to the remarks that were included by Chair Blackburn and yourself, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if there's any assurances you can give us. I think the staff's been in communication, but I'd yield if there are. If not, I'd yield back the balance of my time.
Happy to work with you on it. I'll get briefed and see what we can do to be helpful.
Thank you, Chairman. Yield back.
Okay, anyone else seeking recognition? If not, the vote now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The question, are there any other amendments Seeing none. Question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 4986 as amended to the House. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Oh, and two announcements for the committee. Allie Burry, who is right there, is leaving to join the Department of Energy to be Dan Brulet's assistant. So this is her last markup. So Allie, thanks for your great service here. Don't forget, once part ENC, always part ENC. And A.T. Johnston is going off to stand up, A.T., to the Department of Defense. Her son he's at West Point or West Point? He's at West Point. She will work with military families in a role over there, a cause dear to her heart. Her son's a second-year cadet at West Point. So she will be at a very high level at the Department of Defense working with families, which is a wonderful calling. But remember, ENC always comes first. So thank you for your service and your son's service. Good luck at the Department of Energy. We know where you live. And we won't subpoena you. With that, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record letters from the following: the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association, Georgia Retailers, Retail Industrial Leaders Association, Florida Retail Federation, South Carolina Retail Association, American Association of Orthopedic Surgeons, California Retailer Association, Illinois Retailer Merchants Association. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, staff's authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation considered by the committee today, so ordered. Without objection, thank you all for your great service in this work. Committee stands adjourned.